Hello and welcome to my homestead. Today I'd like to do a full overview of my property. It's been a few months since I've done that, and people have been asking me repeatedly to provide a better view of what has been happening here. So today we're starting in my backyard. You can see a line of trees. There are two lines of them actually. So this is what I call my nut grove. I have my walnuts here. You can see they're growing quite nicely. This one is a Carpathian walnut. It's my favorite because it's from Ukraine. I also have a Chandler walnut. Actually, there are 8 trees, 8 walnuts. I also have one red oak, just to create a little bit more of a forest feel here. You might notice there is a new addition to my backyard, so let's walk over there and take a look. Here we are. This is the chicken coop. You can see I have mesh netting on it. This is to protect from the predators. I still have to put the tarp on top to provide some shade and to protect from the rain. Now on the outside I have some grape wines planted. This is Pinot Gris. So this is a wine variety, but the idea is not to make wine but to provide shade for the chickens later on. The grapes will spread rather fast. You can see I have 3 plants here. They will grow along this structure. They will climb and provide natural shade. Hopefully the girls will like it. The chickens are too small right now to be outside, so they're still indoors. And you've seen my previous videos on them, so I will not show them today. But let's focus on the actual growth here around. So let's go to the back side of the yard. So we're starting here with these trees. This is a lemon. Actually 2 lemons. They were all but dead, and I thought I was going to lose them completely, but they're recovering and growing quite nicely. Same thing with this passion fruit. You can see a lot of new growth. It's climbing, it's growing. I had to chop off the old vines, even though they were almost 30 feet long. They were all badly damaged. But it's recovering quite well. And there is a fig tree here. So over here along the borders, my sister insisted on having herbaceous borders all along, so I have lots of flowers. There is dahlias or georginas. They're getting ready to bloom. Lots of blooming heads. There's a lot of gladioli, different varieties. They were very weak last year, but they're growing quite nicely this year. And there is also rose bushes. You can see this one is just beginning to set buds. And on this side, we already have some blooming. They're beautiful. On the other side of the fence, there are also roses. There is 4 roses over here. I'll show you a close-up in a moment. But you get the idea. There is a lot of flowers all along this border. Now there is also roses in pots. Let me walk over there. Here we are. This is just beginning to open. This is an edible rose and it smells really lovely. But unfortunately they only last a day or so. This was a full rose yesterday. Today I have to clip it off. They really don't last very long, but bees love them. This one is just beginning to get ready to bloom. It has not bloomed yet, so I have not yet seen it in full bloom. This is a Gabriel oak, David Austin rose. This is so far has been my favorite classical English rose. Absolutely gorgeous. Again, David Austin roses. I already clipped quite a few. You can see the remaining where the previous heads were. And it will continue blooming. So while we're here, I want to show you a couple of new additions to my tropical garden. These are the mango trees. You can see that they were really badly damaged. They came with disease, so I had to spray them with fungicide. And hopefully they will recover. But right now, they're going to stay in pots. They cannot survive any kind of cold weather. So hopefully they will recover and will be moved in for the winter. I also want to show you this tree. This poor tree is Loquat. It was all but dead. It arrived in a really poor condition. You can see the damage from it. But you can also see new growth. So all along here it started growing. It's growing new leaves, so it's surviving. This twig is an apple tree. It was actually broken off from its mother tree. It was growing from the root, and it's established and it's growing new leaves, so it's nice and healthy. This one is just beginning to root, so it's a chestnut. Hopefully it will grow. Alright, so let's get back to flowers and my herbaceous border as well as my grape vines. So here we are in my backyard. I have this beautiful mulberry tree loaded with fruit. Unfortunately, it's right next to the nest of blackbirds and they get very unhappy if I spend too much time here. You can see the water lilies are beginning to open up. I love this time of the year. I have multiple varieties of water lilies. The irises are overgrown and they need to be cut down, but they already finished blooming. There is just a random bloom here and there. I have a nice hosta here in the shade. I also have this plant. This is a pepper plant, black pepper. It's growing quite nicely, new young leaves. So it's very happy with humidity and with warm air. Sent a lot of growth. So hopefully I'll have some nice black pepper from here. Lilies are beginning to bloom as well. Now here I have 2 grow boxes. These are my carrots. Because of voles I don't have a whole lot of areas where I can plant them safely and voles will not eat them. But carrots are growing quite nicely. They're beginning to look more like a jungle. I have another rose in here, growing quite nicely. Here is another pond. I do have fish. There's lots of babies. And I have this beauty. A different type of water lily. Alright, so let's transition on the other side. Before we go. Here is another iris. Like I said, they're almost done blooming. You can see they're already finished. I need to cut them down. So here in this corner we have some more lilies. They're quite lovely. And I have a rose that's getting ready to bloom. Can't wait to see its full colors. I have a few bachelor buttons. But the main growth is actually in the main garden. I also put a few tomato plants along the border. I don't know if they're gonna grow well, but I had way too many seedlings, so let them be. I have this Linganberry. It's not really thriving here, but it's not very happy. There's a little bit of a grape wine growing through. So, as you can see, quite a few tomatoes here. Again, too many seedlings, not enough space. Roses are doing quite well. This one is getting ready to bloom as well. And then there are these beauties. They're gorgeous. These are classical English rose. And you can see some of them already fall down. Alright, and another look at dahlias. So let's get outside and we'll take a look at what's out here. As I had mentioned, there are multiple dahlias and grape vines planted along here. Here's a nice example. This is a Concord Grape. It's doing very well. There's lots of fruit that's setting, and hopefully will produce. Concord is very productive, so very prolific. You might have noticed I also have some green peas here. This is not for eating, but just to add some nitrogen. The green peas are nitrogen fixers, so I'm trying to improve the soil here. The main beds of his green peas are actually in the main garden, so I'll show you in just a little bit. But let's transition out. Over here we have, this is a yellow raspberry, and my grape wines. You can see I have several that are a little bit bigger, but most of them are quite young. They're growing, but these are all very young. I have overall 2 dozen grape wines. These are all table varieties, meaning you eat them, these are not for wine. Eventually this will become a nice vineyard, but for now they're going to be here as they are, and each variety is different. So let's transition into the orchard. Here we are in the orchard. You can see the trees are still very young, but they are beginning to slowly produce. Here is a good example. This is Montmorency cherry, so it's a sour cherry. I have plums, different varieties. That little fellow is really upset that I'm near his nest. They're very territorial, so they keep yelling at me. Alright, so I have plums, I have cherries, I have multiple varieties of apples. There are several pistachio trees, different varieties of pears, nectarine, peaches, and apricots. Here is an apple tree, but you can see the damage from the birds. They're eating everything. So here is my nectarine. It had many nectarines on it, but only one remains. It's doing quite well so far, but unfortunately the birds have eaten the rest. Let me show you peaches. There are also figs. So here is a fig tree. There is a pistachio tree. And I'll talk about all the growth here on this patch. But let me show you peaches first. This peach tree was loaded with peaches before. Unfortunately, most of it either dropped or the birds got it. There are only 3 remaining, but they're quite nice. They're getting bigger. I do have a quince tree. And this is persimmon, chocolate persimmon in particular. It also has fruit setting. Growing quite nicely. Here is a pear. As I said, the fruit are setting. Since we're already here, let me show you the herbaceous flower garden that my sister planted. She wanted to make sure that I had lots of flowers here, and planted all of this lovely lavender. Gorgeous colors. Stunning. It really is quite beautiful, and the aroma is amazing, and the bees love it. There is also a border of lilies on the other side. They're spectacular. Last year there were a lot of delphinium here. Unfortunately, most did not survive, so only a few. Here is a teeny tiny one growing that's left from last year, and there is another one on this side. It's just beginning to bloom, but it's a really poor shape. For some reason, delphinium does not thrive here. But there are other plants that are doing quite well. Alright. While we are by the tulip tree, this is my tulip magnolia. Lovely flowers. It's one of my favorite flowers to see, but it is quite messy. Nice big flowers. And there are quite a few of them. You can see what they look like when they're still closed and when they're open, side by side. Alright, let's get back into my flower patch and my garden patch here. So here we are. Here is a feijoa growing quite nicely. It's not blooming, so I'm probably not going to have any fruit this year. But next to it is Israeli artichoke or sunchokes. They're growing really vigorously. They're at least 4 feet tall now, so they're going to be about 6 to 7 feet. Now this patch is a new one. I put some fresh compost on top of the cardboard and planted some watermelons here. They're growing quite nicely. Another feijoa. This green patch is a mixture of green peas. It is another watermelon, doing really well. There is green peas, but more importantly, there are some Japanese turnips here. They're beautiful white turnips. More watermelons. Here is the turnip. You can see there are different varieties. Some are bigger than others. Growing quite nicely. Alright, so this was the patch when I had the watermelons and sweet potatoes here. And some watermelons were self-seeded. I did not seed them here, like the ones here. You can see how many of them have sprouted. All of these are self-seeded. I keep trying to thin them out so that they can have more chances of growing well. But more and more show up every day. This was the patch both here and here. I had tulips in the spring, but the tulips are now done blooming, so the watermelons are going to take over. Again, these are self-seeded. I did not put them here. I did plant these Elysium flowers. They're absolutely lovely. The bees love them. They create this nice border. They're a pollinator attractor, mostly for my peppers. You can see pepper plants. These are all sweet peppers. And I have a few onions here. This is just to eat a little bit. I have one sunflower that came up on this side and a couple on the other side, and as well as more watermelons. So you can see a lot of stuff growing here. Alright, so since we started talking about peppers, let's transition into the main yard, into main garden, and let's see what's growing there. So here we are on the other side of the drive-in, right by the pond. I have a number of trees here as well. There are cherries and pears, and there is a apple tree, a peach tree, and a huge pear tree on the other side of the pond. On this side, I have my blueberries. They're covered from birds because the birds keep stripping them. And here, as you can see the example, this was completely loaded with blueberries, just like this branch, it loaded. This was loaded, and the birds keep stripping it. And this is why. They know when they're ripening. So the blueberries are beginning to ripen, and of course birds are trying to eat them. Here's my pomegranate. You can see it's beginning to set flowers. I can't wait for them to actually form. Last year I had flowers, but nothing grew really because the tree was way too young. It was just planted last year. Hopefully this year it will actually produce. Before we move on, I have this blackberry growing quite nicely. You can see it's still green. And I have this kiwi that my sister wanted. So she made sure that I would have kiwi fruit. This is a hardy kiwi. Alright, so here we are in the main garden. You might have noticed that there's jungle that used to be here. If you recall some of my first videos from this place. All of this used to be covered in phragmites. These tall reeds are what's called the phragmites. Unfortunately, they're extremely invasive. As you can see, I have the flow out from the pond. When the pond is overfilled, it comes out into this ditch, into canal, and it flows out. And phragmites love water, so they grow perniciously everywhere. But here is my garden. It's beginning to look like a jungle, mostly because the green peas are so tall. We had 90 degrees heat for several days now. Unfortunately, it forced everything into bolting or blooming. The plants simply do not like this kind of heat. And that includes the peas. My idea was to have 3 different beds. This was the first one planted. The second bed was this long one. And the third one was this right here. The idea was to have all of them planted at different times so they would ripen at different times, and the heat had forced everything to go into bloom prematurely. But you can see I have a lot of pods, and they're quite nice, big. These are green arrows and telephone. So the telephone peas are very tall. You can immediately say which ones they are. But there are some smaller varieties as well right next to them, like this Cascadia. And there is the Alaskan and the Tiny Thumb. They're all growing in here. But you can see they're suffering from the heat. The heat is making everything yellow. Just not meant to have this kind of temperature this time of year. It's a nice rose opening up. You can see these flowers. They're absolutely delicate, lovely. This is actually Korean radish. So the idea is to have these seed pods. Hopefully they will finish ripening and I can collect seeds for the future. I really like that radish. So here is a Tiny Thumb. I wanted to compare different varieties of green peas and see how well they do. I do have some green leaves that overwintered, like the Swiss chard. And again, because of heat, it just bolted and went into seed. So I can no longer use it, but I can get seed from it for next year. I have a tomato plant here that's not too happy. And I have some of the onions. These were grown from sets. The others that I showed earlier were grown from seed. Before I go off, here is my wild flower patch. You can see a lot of bachelor button. These beautiful blue flowers. They attract a lot of pollinators. The bees absolutely adore them. You can see them flying around. I have a few marigolds, and they have pineapple sage that my sister gave me last year. The last year had died, but the new one is growing, and it's quite nice. The smell is amazing. I have thyme blooming. More flowers here along the border. Here I have a bunch of lilies scattered, but they're just planted this year, so they're going to be very small, and they really will show their colors next year. I don't know what the name of this flower is. Whatever it is, it's gorgeous. I'd like to know. It's interesting leaves. If anyone knows what it is, by all means, let me know. I'd like to know what this is. I have oregano on this side, which will be very useful when we have time for sauces. As you can see, this interesting flower as well. Again, I don't know what it's called, but it is very unique. If anyone knows what this is, please let me know. It is when it's opening up. It's lovely. So here we are, back at the peas again. Multiple varieties. You can see they're ripening, and there is a lot of them. I'm gonna now have to figure out how to preserve them. There's the telephone. Telephone peas are the easiest ones to identify. Very large pods, not small and skinny, and they grow up to 6-7 feet tall easily. You can see the pollinators love this area. Okay, so here is one of my experimental plants. I have never grown this particular pepper. This is a Carolina Reaper. This is just an experiment for me to see how it grows. It has flowers already setting. but my guess is I'm not going to really eat it. I just want to see what it produces and how. I have Jenny's artichokes. They're doing quite well. They're setting up actual artichokes. Together with Sweet William. You can see there are multiple artichokes on these plants. So in a week or so, I'll be able to pick them, and Jenny will have her artichokes to eat. Here is more Sweet William. They're lovely, lovely colors, different varieties. And my fig tree. The rose is already finished blooming. This is the first flush, the spring bloom. I need to take all of the dead heads off, trim them, and they will start blooming again. But I also want to show you this blueberry bush. It's probably the most prolific of all of them. You can see the blueberries are ripening. There are a lot of them. It's going to be a very prolific year for blueberries. Look at these. They're gorgeous. I keep them covered up because the birds keep trying to eat them. Nice ripe blueberries. Alright, so while we're here, let me transition into this jungle. Still need a lot of work to clear everything out, but at least now I can see some of the lilies here. Before I couldn't see anything. I have white mulberry growing right here. It's doing quite well. And next to it is black mulberry. I have one blueberry bush here. And I have a teeny tiny red currant. But more importantly, I have these. This is another experiment for me. This is taro root. I have never grown taro root. Taro is very useful. You can eat it just like you would a regular potato. Steam it, boil it, do whatever you want. Just hosta. Alright. Here is another jungle, so let me backtrack a little bit. I've already shown you the garlic before, different varieties. Again, there is 18 varieties of garlic in this patch. The strawberries